Hello again, everybody. It's time to continue my crazy build here. I start this one with me starting to work on the front passenger seat. I ended up taking out the front passenger side because it was non-reclinable, very uncomfortable even for me. I wanted something a little bit more comfortable for my wife, and since I had the pair of Sienna seats, I actually ended up putting the reclining seat in this position, or wanted to. So I started by just putting everything together, and of course the seat bracket's not meant for this car, and it's just a application for another car. So I ended up putting everything together. It kind of flowed through and it was okay. I shortly found out that it didn't really work. So what I ended up doing was, when I mounted the seat, I had to use this pedestal from the original because there was some electronics for the seatbelt inside, and I didn't really figure it was didn't really think of an easy way to take it out. So I went ahead and left it in, and this is what happened. Way too close to the door, and I actually couldn't close the door. Can't reach the switch lever, so kind of gave up on that idea for now. Worked on tinting the windows. I ended up using the darkest limo tint, and worked out really good. You can't really see in very easily, but I can see out okay. The front windows, I used the lighter tint, at least just to get the UV protection coming in, because I hate when my arm burns from the window sun. And because I put the limo tint in the back, I ended up buying this wireless rear view camera for the back, and I put that one on. Works really well. After this, I started hunting for the bed, and I wanted to do an IKEA bed mattress. So I found a used futon, good condition. Bought it for really cheap, like between $40 to $60. And I ended up using the mattress, and I was like, oh, this is great. It's cheap, it's clean. So I threw it in. It turns out futon mattresses aren't exactly the same size, and they're longer. So it kind of bunched up on the side wall, kind of makes an integrated pillow, but very hard, and it started to rub against the back insulation wall. So I said, forget it, and let me see if I can figure something out. So I started to pull off the upholstery, and I found out that it's coil inside, and I thought it was foam, and I felt it, and I don't know, bad luck. So I ended up trying to peel it apart a little bit more, and at this point I was like, okay, I got this far, and couldn't turn back. So I just kept going forward. I took off about 2 rows. I calculated out how much I needed to go down to get to a full-size bed mattress size. And all I did was take out 2 rows of coils. I cut the foam, cut the wiring, cut the perimeter form wire, and I put it back together. I ended up using some fabric adhesive, and I glued it together. I put the upholstery back on, and I just used the same one. It made a little bit of a loose fit, but it still worked. So I put the mattress back in, and voila, it fits perfectly within the confines of the van walls, and exactly the way I imagined it, and easy to fold, has a seam in the middle, and it's easy to remove and bring back into the house. I ended up coming up with this idea of making my own riser bracket that offsets the seat a little bit. I ended up using some, I think this is 1.5 inch tubing. Drilled some holes, mounted it. I ended up taking off all the electronics and the slider, and I put it on because I definitely wanted the seat to go back and forth. And I just went one step at a time, mounted everything, put the holes in, and ended up using like some really nice grade 8 bolts that I found at the hardware store, so it would be nice and firm. I tried mounting it right ways in, and I ended up flipping the sliders backwards because it was hard to get onto. So you have to adjust the front and back movement of the seat from the rear of the seat. And once I get everything mounted in, it worked out really well. The lower height was a little better, but still the seat is very tall, so plenty of room for your legs in the front. And here's the reclining and everything. I also took a picture of the seat reclined a little bit more just to show how much room and how comfortable it can be. And it worked out really well. Integrated armrests, everything. Made everything very comfortable for the trip. So I ended up still using the van for work. I had the ventilation working through the batteries. I was still able to pick up raw materials. And here I wanted to show a picture of the raw material inside, and you can see how good fit it was. And it doesn't move around side to side when I turn. I had that pallet brake in the front, so it doesn't move forward to backwards. Very safe, very stable. Everything worked out really good. In this picture, the batteries are on the right side, and all my electronics are in. Shortly after I checked to get ready for solar, solar mounting, I went on the roof and there's a bunch of pitted rust marks. And I think it was from cutting the roof open, like the shards and little pieces. So I ended up mopping the whole thing, scrubbing it with soap, cleaning the whole thing up. And because I was going to put a solar panel over it, I had to at least fix some of the areas that had the rust, because once I mounted it, I didn't want to go back in. So the rust kind of looks like this spot rusting where the paint came off. I ended up just sanding it down with a Scotch-Brite wheel, if I remember correctly, attached to my drill. And I sanded it afterwards a little bit just to make sure the seams, there was no major edges on it. And I wanted to make sure the rust was completely gone. So I wiped everything off, and I primed it, and I painted it with the same off-white color that you can totally tell is different. And I moved on to mounting my solar panel. I ended up getting a good deal on some used 300 watt monocrystalline panels, and went with those. And you know, my gutters I didn't really worry about, but the top side I kind of fixed a little bit. You can kind of see the nice pure white area on top that I fixed. So now with the solar panels itself, I ended up getting these off-the-shelf mounting brackets from eBay that I found that were made out of aluminum. It rises it up about 1.5 inches, very tight to the roof, just enough to clear the bowing. So I mounted the wires so I can mount it flush to the thing. I used flush to the roof. I mounted it using these double-sided tape mounting tabs, and I zip tied it on, and I popped it out to the front side. Here I put the pad tabs on, and you're supposed to only use 4, but I don't know. And they're rated to high winds, but I was scared it was going to fly off and rip off the roof, so I ended up putting 2 sets. I put 8 tabs on, more in the front and distributed in the back just because of the lifting. And this panel is pretty big, so I butted up against the vent on the back, and it came up most of the way forward. So I mocked it up, liked where the placement was, and I popped some holes, and I ended up leaving it there. I used a self-trapping sheet metal screws, and drilled the holes for the power to go in. I used grommets to make sure that the sheets metal would not cut the wires and kind of ground everything out. I washed everything out with some citrus cleaner. Don't mind the bottle, and then I die-cored everything. Even the backside, I actually die-cored the backside too. So everything was all nice and sealed up. I used a lot of die-core on the wire inlet, and also I die-cored around the mounting tabs also, just to make sure that would stay, because it was definitely not rated for outdoors, but I figured if I covered everything up, it would last a little bit more. I did this all at the office, and I actually ended up driving it home. I was so scared the panels were going to rip off, but it stayed. Everything worked out really well. I did drive about maybe 50 miles per hour, and I didn't have any issues with the roof. When you do hit about 65 miles per hour, it does end up shaking just a little bit. So I ended up taking the wood boxes out, and I started to line all my wires and mount everything to the box itself. Here you can see all my electronics starting to make a little nest. Temperature probes, the distribution blocks, and the breakers, and the charge controller, and all this stuff is going in. A note: eBay does not sell the same 4-gauge wire across everybody. Guys gotta be careful. This is 4-gauge wire, both of them, and you could totally tell the difference between the two. Outside is actually the same size too, so be careful. The boxes were a little bit hard to open, so I ended up carpeting it and putting these paracord pull tabs, and that worked out really well because I can throw the mattress on top and it doesn't catch, it doesn't pull, it doesn't do anything weird. So I like that idea. This is just standard speaker wire I bought off of Amazon. Again, I used cheaper spray adhesive for the walls that didn't work, and I had extra cans, so I used that here, and that worked out really well. I attached all my fuses to the upper side of the lids, and I used, I think, 80 amp fuses for those. Here I put the lighting on the inside rib, and I wanted to show how bright it was. I used a full 5 meters. Here I show the touch sensor controller of the lights that I bought on eBay. This controller was, I think, it was really cheap, so I think it had about 100 levels of brightness or something like that, and came out really good. It's meant for DC power. Totally recommend it. It works out great. Haven't had any issues with it. Has an on-off dimming, and also there's a right and left arrow that you can manually increase and lower the increments. I got everything hooked up. Solar was bringing in power, batteries were stable. I started to monitor how much power I was using. I was using a spare fridge from my office that I found, and I wanted to first make sure that the power was stable and I didn't have any bad batteries. So I would monitor how much voltage is coming in. I tried charging my cell phone first just to make sure if there was any problems. Everything on my system is switched out. So you can see here I pulled the shut off for the solar. So I was just testing the batteries for now. Then I went to testing the solar coming in, and didn't have any major issues. I was very careful with my polarity, and everything worked out really well. I ended up going a couple days and I checked my voltages. Battery coming for each cell was around 12.5 in the middle of the night when I was using it, and kept stable at about 100. So everything worked out really well. So I ended up mounting all my electronics onto a thin plywood board. I was going to mount this onto the wall. I knew that I was going to finish this wall just so I can have a nice clean look. So I ended up arranging it, popping some holes, pilot holes for the mounting tabs, and then I took everything back off and I stained it and I sealed it, and this is how it looked like afterwards. You can see the holes on there. Excuse me. So that worked out really well, and I mounted this panel right above the box line, and I had the wires going behind it, and this was on the outside of the stud, so I had about an inch of room behind it to run all the wiring, and the wiring for the lights would go up and the wiring for the electronics would go down to the distribution. On the driver's side, I ended up putting like a mini stud across horizontally, and I put mounting D-rings, and this I got from online on eBay too. They were really cheap, and I ended up mounting the spare fridge from my office just because I had it laying around, and I set this height up so I can carry like propane tanks or cylinders or whatever I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure it was still working with the office for my work stuff. Here I have display was bringing in about 34 amp hours during the day, and it was charging up back to 100. Everything was working good, even with the fridge. But I wanted to try to push my limits on efficiency, so I ended up finding this deal on this half cube, And I did a little bit of research, and it turns out Edison has a rebate for smaller fridges, so I got $35 back. So it ended up being like about 30 bucks for that fridge. So I was like, oh, go ahead. So I went ahead and bought that mini fridge and lowered my consumption a little bit. And after that, since we had the fridge and we had the bed and the batteries and the solar and the ventilation, I went ahead and let's go test it out. So we went on a quick one-night camp trip and loaded up with some wood and went out for a little test ride, and it turned out really well. We used some plastic totes and brought everything along with food, and it worked out really well. Didn't have any issues with power, had plenty of power even with the 4 batteries. We went into the local mountains about 2 hours away, national forest. Got there in the afternoon, left the next morning. We were able to do pretty much everything I imagined. Made rice with a small little rice cooker. Because we had the full fridge and freezer, we were able to take ice cream and some Japanese fish eggs. I liked eating those with rice and some meat. So here I think we is this 4.6 amps? This is how much power I was pulling in during the day while I was using the fridge, and you can kind of see the inverter is only working between 30% power output. This is the food I brought to the campsite, and the ice cream was frozen as expected. We ended up bringing some meats to cook over the fire, you know, just kind of nice. We actually eat better when we when I go camping. So of course I threw in a picture of my food. Love cooking over wood fires, and didn't have any interruption in power. Everything stayed fresh. This is just the eggs and the meat and the rice on top. Van worked out really good on this test run. This is our first trip out, and worked out really well for us. Here's a picture of the van campsite we stayed in. I think this is a 2-car trailer slot campsite. The van looks really big in this picture. It is. It's an extended van. So and mine is the 3500 with the airbags on the back, and it's a really rough ride, and I still desire to go smaller. Kept the water by the fire. Actually warmed it up, so we need to wash our hands and kind of clean up a little bit. The bed, I had a pack and play for the baby. At this time, the baby was about 1.5 years to about 2 years old. So we still needed a crib. Had plenty of room. Worked out really well. Everybody slept well. Insulation held well. Power through the night worked out really well. You can hear the fridge kick on and off because you're so close to it, but ended up working out okay. So next morning, packed up, left. Everything worked out really well. You can see my little tape job for my lights going across the perimeter of the van. Worked out okay. I mean, it's not pretty, but it does work. We camped up a little bit higher in the altitude. I don't remember the elevation. I think it was like 6,000 foot. But yeah, good test. Good test. I'll continue this in a little bit, and I'll see you guys on the next video to recap some minor changes and review what happened with this camp trip change.